So I was speaking to a friend recently about seclusion, and what I was saying was that seclusion is neither good nor bad, but it's really what you do inside seclusion that makes it so. And we're speaking about more of if your mind is defiled, then seclusion is not going to make it better. Of itself.
Well, that's what we said before. Seclusion is it's like an amplifier, so it will amplify whatever you carry, whatever you have. So that's why you're trying to determine whether seclusion is good or bad. It's trying to determine whether amplification is good or bad. But in itself, that's neutral. Amplification is neither good nor bad, but things that you amplify will determine whether it's good or bad. Whether you're amplifying bad states of mind, or are you amplifying the wholesome ones, the good ones. So seclusion, that's all it is really. It will only increase what you already have. That's why the Buddha himself said the person needs to be ready first. Restrained by the rules of Patimokkha, develop mind in samadhi, develop the right view before that person can benefit from solitude. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to develop solitude, because that's another way to find out whether you are carrying good or bad mostly.
Yeah.
Put yourself in seclusion and you see what gets amplified. And then you realize, okay, now the bad states are amplifying, which I must address that. I mustn't develop a view, oh, I will never go to seclusion again because it amplified all these bad things. No, it amplified things that you need to do. So from that point of view, seclusion is always good. Good as an indicator of what work needs to be done and to what extent. So sometimes you don't notice things, you go into seclusion and it will amplify whatever is really there, fundamentally underlying your moods and so on. And once it's amplified, you know it's there.
You can almost see where you're going in your life.
Absolutely.
You go to seclusion.
Or what you're running away from in your life.
Yeah.
Or what responsibility you're trying to avoid in your life. So amplification is good, but not in itself. It's good if used rightly, if used skillfully, to highlight the symptoms that you're trying to discern. So in that sense, solitude, it's necessary. But in itself, solitude does not result in wisdom or any development if you don't make the effort to develop and undo unwholesome states.
But it's good to challenge yourself.
Absolutely,
and go try
because
it. Because
if you don't challenge your situation, you're not going to see what's underlying it. And that's people think challenging situation means exposing yourself to sensuality and temptations. No, that's basically proliferating your ignorance. Challenging situation is practicing withdrawal bit by bit. Seclusion, boredom, anxiety of solitude and loneliness. Yeah, that's how you start challenging basically the fundamental structure of your experience, not just the particular issue that you might be bothered or you're trying to overcome. So you want to amplify it. You want to put a magnifying glass and then see what shows, and then you know exactly where your work is. So in that sense, you use solitude rightly, even with the wrong view, even without having developed right view and jhanas and samadhi and so on. You can still use solitude to your advantage, but it's obviously going to be unpleasant. But that's the whole point. If undoing unwholesome states is wholly pleasant, everybody would be an arahant, pretty much, automatically.
Yeah, very quickly.
Because everybody would just follow pleasure, they would result in arahantship. But it doesn't work like that.
So if your mind is most of the time lustful, most of the time angry, most of the time distracted, you go into seclusion.
That's what's going to be amplified.
For a few days it might not be those things. Quite novelty experience, very beautiful.
Give it some time.
The forest
it's
is
not
lovely.
instant. The moment you close the door or you're alone, everything gets amplified. Well, sometimes. but no, that's it. Yeah, settle in seclusion and then you'll see what starts bubbling up from the bottom. But that's another thing. See, if you never amplify even unwholesome states, you'll never realize how serious they are. How how deeply rooted those issues are.
And
That's why
this-
people, by default, people who are not interested in practice, that's why nobody likes solitude. Everybody tries to find constantly something to keep their mind occupied, something to keep them flowing on the surface. Because fundamentally what solitude will amplify is the unpleasant state of existence. Unpleasant recognition. You don't necessarily fully grasp it or fully admit it, for that matter, but you certainly start getting hints of that fundamental lack of control in regard to your feelings, in regard to your existence, in regard to your life, in regard to everything you hold dear to you. That's why solitude often results in well, first boredom, then that boredom becomes existential dread.
And the Buddha encourages people or monks not to go into seclusion, maybe for long periods, unless they've got a grasp on
Yeah.
their situation, on their minds. They can handle things.
But that doesn't mean that you should spend most of your day occupied with others, or hanging out with others, or just being physically present with others. No, you shouldn't go to the complete wilderness where you're going to be fearing for your life and whatnot. Like the utter, utmost wild seclusion.
Too far in the deep.
It will be too much to handle. But that's not to say, oh, you should socialize
Yeah.
because of that. No, quite the opposite. So unless you prepare yourself for that kind of seclusion, with lesser amounts of seclusion, you'll never prepare yourself for that. And that's the problem that I was saying before, where people try to determine the environment and the circumstances, whether that will do the practice for you. So is seclusion good or is seclusion bad? It depends why you do it. It depends what you amplify. It depends whether you're ignoring what you're amplifying. But if people don't see that, then they'll either blame seclusion or praise seclusion for wrong reasons. So I went to too much seclusion, too much soon. My mind couldn't handle it, so I developed a view: seclusion's bad. And now I don't do it. And there's absolutely no reason to develop that view. That was you overdoing it based on a bad experience. But if you start discerning and realize, well, it's just an amplifier. It amplified my bad states of mind. So what if I, as the Buddha would say in the suttas, a wise man would reflect thus: what if I were to undo my unwholesome states, or at least suppress them to some degree through my mindfulness and discernment and effort and virtue, and then I try seclusion? And then the Buddha said there would be absolute bliss and pleasure. The pleasure of seclusion. The joy that nothing else can match. But it needs to be developed in that manner.
Because it's though that people leave themselves out of the equation while judging if seclusion. No, the seclusion is bad.
Yeah.
Well, it's bad because of you.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. Obviously, there's a natural tendency in everyone to develop like a factual view that pertains to seemingly factual state of things, as a universal independent of me. It's a fact. It has nothing to do with me. But when it comes to the practice of Dhamma, most of the things will be determined by where your intentions are rooted. That's what makes it good or bad, not universal rule. As I said, you can go on a meditation retreat for a completely, utterly unwholesome, wrong reasons. But on paper, meditation is always good. But you're doing it to avoid your solitude, to avoid practice, to avoid responsibility. So that's what I mean. There are obvious things that are always bad, and that's where the precepts come in. You just never do those things. But now everything else that's more refined than that will be determined by your intentions. As I gave the example before, multiple times, like, oh, I want to go to the library and read the suttas. Like, if you say that like that, it's a good thing, isn't it? It's great. But if you start looking at it, why you want to do it? Oh, because there's like lots of people there, and you're going to end up socializing, maybe even meet like-minded people, and like you don't necessarily explicitly think about it. That's the nature of inauthentic attitude and bad faith. You turn a blind eye to yourself, to what the real reason is. What the real reason is that I want to go to such and such place and read the suttas and do meditation. Well, it's really because I feel a bit bored or a bit lonely or a bit scared or a bit this or a bit that. I need distraction. That's not always the reason. So when that is not the reason, then if the reason is genuinely, no, I want to find all these suttas, I spent 3 days thinking about it, that now means, okay, it's a good reason, good thing. That's why, like, the things that are unavoidable, like things that are that you can do without, such as Buddha said, sexual intercourse or sensuality, you do without it. You just stop doing it. But things that you can't do without, such as eating food, that will be determined. That's not always unwholesome, even if it's the food you really like. It's unwholesome if you eat it carelessly, which means if you eat it for the wrong reasons. If you eat it for the reasons of carelessness, means automatically you've been eating it for the reasons of sensual enjoyment, not for the genuine, factual hunger. Mm-hmm. So it's your responsibility then to reroute your reasons in the right foundation of hunger, sustenance of the body, basic health and strength, so that you can carry on slightly harder lifestyle of solitude and so on, so that you can practice the Dhamma. But if you forget those reasons, then you automatically eat them for sensual reasons. But if you don't look at the reasoning, then you'll be blaming the food. Then you'll be trying to avoid the taste, or blaming the taste, or not eating, or fasting, or like giants, starve yourself to death, thinking that's the ultimate renunciation. But that's not the point. So things like food, and there are many other things, they are not in themselves neither wholesome nor unwholesome. They're a necessity. But that doesn't mean that, they're a necessity, I can eat it carelessly. No, by eating it carelessly, you make the necessity unwholesome. Mm-hmm. So the responsibility for wholesome and unwholesome lies where your intentions are. That's why every action is intention. It's rooted in intention. So good action, bad action, neutral action will be so based on good, bad, or neutral intentions. But it's easier to sort of develop a view and try to make it factual and just blame things or make things responsible for your intentions. Oh no, I'm hungry, I must eat. That's true on one level. But if you eat carelessly, means your hunger will be secondary to your sensual enjoyment of that food. If you eat carefully, means sensual enjoyment will be secondary to your hunger, which means, even as the Buddha said, even if it's the various choices of various curries, hand-picked rice, it still won't be infusing your mind with sensuality, because you haven't lost perspective. You're eating mindfully, aware, transparent towards the reasons for your eating. And you become transparent by dwelling on those reasons, by not turning a blind eye. That's the whole point.
So when you're going to seclusion, for example, you have to have the right reasons beforehand?
You clarify the reasons. If you're not sure whether they're right or wrong, well, go a little bit and then see what comes up.
Yeah, why am I doing this exactly?
But if you can't handle seclusion, okay, you go back, but not like, I'll never try this again. I can't handle, not because seclusion is at fault. I can't handle because my mind is at fault, because I'm not strong enough.
Yeah,
so I'll then practice and develop more strength so that I can handle it.
Yeah.
It's not optional, that's the thing. Amplifying the foundations of your mind through seclusion is not optional. But yeah, amplification can be bad as well if you haven't done necessary work beforehand.
Yeah, the state of your mind is much more clearer.
Exactly.
Because no one's around. So
well, there's nothing taking away your attention, and by not being distracted in that basic manner, what you're going to stay with is the states of your mind, which means whether you want it or not, you're going to start seeing them more clearly. And that's why the Buddha said one cannot develop the sign of his own mind, citta nimitta, without having established himself in seclusion. And without having developed the sign of the mind, citta nimitta, how can one develop the right view? That's impossible. So in that sense, that's what I mean, amplification is not optional. My practice is so good I can do without solitude. No. Practice and solitude are almost synonyms. Yeah. Practice is amplifying these things that need to be undone. Amplifying wrong views because of which you get to abandon them.
Because if you start getting angry in solitude,
Yeah.
because of whatever your thoughts you're having, you're getting angry, you can then see exactly what you do about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like what, so it shows where you're at. How do I deal with anger?
Yeah, well, the
What's the
boundaries,
result?
the lines you cross from your mental thought of anger to a verbal expression of anger to a physical expression of anger are much clearer in solitude. You realize that actually there is no connection between the three. It's not that thought automatically seeps into speech, that then automatically seeps into physical action. No. Thought always remains within the domain of thought, speech always remains within the domain of speech, bodily action always remains within the domain of bodily action. They're completely separate domain, unaware of each other, you can say like that. Three simultaneous domains of your three types of intentions. But it's thought with ignorance goes for speech, goes for the physical action. But your ignorance is that bridge that connects it, nothing else. And when you live in the environment that revolves around it, it's automatic. I think bad, I speak bad. I'm angry, I say it. It's just effortless. It's with the grain, so to speak. But in the solitude, that's kind of you can benefit from if you started practicing that restraint of bodily action, verbal action, then you get to see that mental action stays on the level of mind. Even if you have a thought, I'm going to go and say something, then you go and say something. Saying something and thinking something are two simultaneous things present together, but not the same. It's not that the same thing channeled from thoughts into your speech and actions. No, it's your magical belief that connects them. Your assumption. Pretty much your wrong view, your upadana. But in solitude, that boundary of you crossing it magically, my thought means my speech, means my action, becomes more apparent. And you lose your own belief in it. That's why people need to believe in their own anger in order to act angrily. You need to make that leap. Angry thoughts cannot make you punch somebody or say something bad. It's your carelessness in regard to the angry thoughts that make you develop belief that punching or saying something offensive is how this is expressed. That's why the more you give in to anger, the more of the ways of expressing it proliferate, which means the easier it's going to be to express it in that magical belief manner. But if you start restraining your belief of expressing the anger through your physical action, you realize, yeah, I'm angry mentally, but what does that have to do with me harming this lump of flesh in this body? It has nothing to do with it. I need to believe that it has something to do with it. That's why people sometimes when they get angry, they break inanimate things. Because the belief of anger has been so proliferated that, yeah, for them now, the things almost become like other people that they can harm through that anger in effect.
But then
It's futile. You know it's futile, but you can't help it, so you smash up thing that upsets you.
Mm-hmm.
It takes that magical kind of attitude.
Because you're trying to get the anger out.
Yeah. You have no other means of dealing with it.
Yeah.
With the unpleasantness of anger.
Exactly.
The only means were give in and try follow that way, and then that makes you follow it further and further and further. But there is no end to that. It's infinite proliferation of your expression. But nothing can uproot it because it's all secondary to the reason for your expressing it in the first place.
So one is overcome by anger. If you're shouting.
Yeah.
So what about sadness? So you're in seclusion. There's just sadness, sad mind.
If you do anything on account of any mental state, if you do anything by body or by your speech, means you could not have contained it. You were too weak to contain it, so you gave in to the magical belief of expressing it through these other separate domains. But once the clarity of that becomes apparent, that these domains are disconnected in a way, you become unable to believe in expressing your anger or your sadness. So you can't be angry, nor can you cry.
Or shout.
Or shout. It just becomes disconnected. That's why the Buddha, when he was describing the nature of the speech, he said, having thought and pondered, one breaks into speech. It doesn't say having thought and pondered, then those thoughts and ponders like flow into the speech that comes out. There is no connection. thinking and pondering breaking into speech.
But
Two separate domains.
but
Yeah, you must have thinking and pondering in order the domain of speech to be broken and spoken, but they don't connect. Certainly not in your assumed way of directionality of with the grain. I think, I speak, I do.
it won't be automatic.
What is uniting for Putujana, doing, speaking and thinking, is his sense of self, basically. So the more you undo the sense of self, the freer from action, three types of action you become. Hence the end of kamma, end of action for an arahant. Because there is nothing connecting these three types of action and no ignorance.
So
So in thought there will be only the thought, in spoken there will only be the spoken, in done there will be what's done. That's it.
So you overcome with sadness. Let's say you're quite aware of that thought, and then so if you try to get rid of it, you think, I don't want the sadness. I'm suffering on account of it. I don't want it. And
Well,
then
in a way, if you try to do anything on account of it.
Yeah. But if there is sadness and you've understood the nature of sadness,
then you wouldn't have. Well, you wouldn't even be able to consider giving into the pressure and looking for the ways of doing something about it, because you're not affected by it in the first place.
or expressing it.
That's what I mean. Doing something about it means expressing it. People express it because that presents itself as a way of doing something about it. And it's not incidental that people have a view, or you must not repress your feelings because they'll find a way out. As in, you give in so badly at one point because you've been trying to restrain yourself.
Right.
Yeah, sure, you will amplify the pressure of giving in, but that's the whole point.
Because your knowledge should be the thing that cuts everything off.
Well, the knowledge, the full understanding of the arisen phenomena, whatever that phenomena may be, sadness, anger, whatever, makes you not affected by it in the first place. That's the true laying down the burden. There is no burden of duty. There is no burden of I must do this, I must do that, I must avoid it. When it arises, I must go this way. When it comes this way, I must go that way. I must manage it. All of that becomes redundant because you're not affected by it in the first place.
Because you're looking at it from...
And that's a true freedom, a relief. Like, oh, it doesn't touch me. This way used to touch me, it doesn't touch me anymore. I don't need to do anything about it. I don't need to watch my breath. I don't need to do anything because I fully understood it and I'm not affected by it in the first place. And I have no doubt about it either. Oh, am I affected by it? Am I not? Means, okay, that lack of clarity regarding whether you're affected by it or not affects you. So you're affected by it. So honestly, transparently, you admit, and then you go further in your discernment, in your reflection, until, am I affected by it? Am I? Well, maybe, but if I were affected, would I suffer? Yes. Do I suffer? No. So in this particular case, at least, I'm not affected because there's no suffering, nor there is any pressure to do something about this. It's just there, literally. Okay, will I be affected? I'm not sure. Well, let's keep a close eye on it and see. So then it comes up, well, maybe, but a bit less, bit more, and you keep reflecting, you keep not ignoring that that's where the problem is. The problem is not that you don't know how to deal with it, or you haven't dealt with it quickly enough, or you haven't dealt with it properly enough, or skillfully. The problem is that you need to deal with it in the first place. So you want to find a place where you don't have to deal with anything. But that place is not physically found on top of a mountain or something. That place can only be found internally. With no internally arising feelings, none of them can touch you. None of them can affect you without you needing to deny them, without you needing to indulge them, without you needing to ignore them. Means feeling is there, fully arisen. What if it arises more? Doesn't matter. Can arise to the infinite amount. No domain of feeling can affect you. Thus, doesn't matter the intensity. You don't worry about intensity because you know you're free from the domain where this intensity is manifested.
The nature.
Yeah. So whether it's like, I don't know, something insignificant, whether it's something insignificant like a bad day, and you couldn't do things you wanted, or whether it's your dying parent in front of you, doesn't matter the intensity of displeasure, you're not affected by it because you abandoned the domain of it. You understood the domain of it, which means abandoned it.
Yeah. Well, everything then has to arise through your view, through the lens of what is right, the right you see everything through the
that
right
is exactly. That is the most
lens.
fundamental, the widest point where things manifest. So from there, they're just going to be more and more particular. But if that widest point has been understood, the basis of feeling as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So you're not concerned with the content. Oh, this is pleasant, this is unpleasant. You're concerned with the fact that it's being felt in the first place. That's what Sariputta meant. Whatever's felt counts as suffering, counts as a problem, counts as something that needs to be undone and overcome. Doesn't matter what it's felt.
But with the right view, whatever is experienced,
Yeah,
you
the
can't-
right view means that, overcoming whatever's felt. That means that whatever is felt in the content cannot affect you either. Because you're not affected by the feeling in itself, let alone pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral manifestation of that feeling.
once you're in seclusion, you can also start to see lust arising from a great distance.
Oh yes,
Or hatred arising from a great distance.
even before it crosses the horizon. Yeah.
Where before it would sneak up on you and just take over.
Yeah.
Now you can see it just
Yeah.
the sign
Hate
of it.
or lust or anything wholesome, they always have to come the same way. The only way, so that means that the only way they can come is if you ignore that way. If you ignore it, it always comes this way. It always manifests itself from distance. It's like getting closer and closer and closer. It will get too close to you when you can't do anything about it. It's because you've been looking away. That's why distraction, i.e. delusion, is pretty much the basis of proliferation for lust and ill will. That's why it's the most blameworthy. Because you haven't been ignoring it, means it cannot come that close, because it requires you to not look at it in order to come to you.
Because if you see distraction, you can see understand distraction, you can see what it's connected to, what it's attached to, and down the line,
You see what else comes through it.
Yeah, and you see all those things.
Yes, yeah.
So
that's why mindfulness you can't have too much of. And it's always to be practiced.
you see what's
You
connected
can't overdo mindfulness. You can't overdo not ignoring. You can overdo active thinking about this, or you can overdo non-active thinking about this, but you can't overdo just that awareness and recognition of what's present. You can't undo that. You can't overdo that, sorry.
You can start to sense what's connected with the unwholesome, what's connected with wholesome.
Yes, that's what it means when we say picking up the tokens and the signs, the peripheral. What are the indicators of this? The connections become more apparent.
More obvious.
Yeah. When horizon changes like this, I end up doing such and such things out of sensuality. And now you see it, because you've seen the horizon. When you're ignoring it, then you just find yourself doing these unwholesome things. But not because they're inevitably to be done. As I said, even if it's a thought of sensuality manifested on a mental level, you are the one with your own sensual assumption that then crosses into verbal and physical domain. There is no natural flow between these domains. That's why you are always responsible for your actions. Because action requires crossing from that domain. Thoughts of sensuality are not your action. They manifest themselves. But you entertaining, indulging, welcoming, adding more to it, acting physically, verbally out of it, that's your action. So that's why no amount of external circumstances will ever be responsible for you choosing to act a certain way. Because in the most fundamental sense, you, yourself, and nobody else is responsible for that belief that travels from the domain of thought to the domain of speech to the domain of physical action. There is no connection between them, only your belief.
This is who I am.
Yeah. So you could say, having thought and pondered, one breaks into speech, one breaks into action, because of his own wrong views. Because of his own views affected by greed, aversion, and ignorance. And that's why whatever you do, you remain bound as the owner of that action, as the Buddha would say. Because you are the bridge between thought and speech and the physical acts. You remove that bridge, then literally you just have things manifested in physical domain, things manifested in mental domain, things manifested in verbal domain, prompted by significance. There is no basis for unwholesome anymore, because that bridge has been undone.
So having an angry thought doesn't mean that automatically you're going to shout.
Exactly.
Or do something.
You need to break into shouting. You need to choose to do it. You need to give into it. Even if it feels the most natural thing, the reason why it feels the most natural, effortless thing is because you've never been practicing enough restraint about it. So you've been smoothing the way, basically. You've been greasing the groove of that particular expression. But it didn't have to be greased that way, which means you can undo it. You know, if you keep chucking the water the same way down the hill, it's going to make a little trench all the way down eventually. And the more you do it, the bigger the trench becomes. In the end, you can just pour it gently, it will go down that trench. You don't even have to throw it. But no amount of depth of the trench will make any difference if there is no water being poured down it in the first place. So if you're not affected by angry thoughts, there will be no ways of looking for expression, whether established way of expressing the anger or new ways of expressing the anger. There is no anger, as in there is no need to express these arisen thoughts. Means all these things, all these channels and trenches that have been made through my careless behavior in the past are dead, dried up, said like a palm stump, cut at its root. So you don't go and trim around the branches or try to cover up, level the trenches that your anger dug up. No, just stop feeding it with the water. It will dry up. Doesn't matter how many trenches stay. What matters is water running down them or not. So you don't go trim around the branches, you uproot it. Then all the branches are dried up and they're done. That's the nature of proliferation, branching out, creating trenches of expression and so on. So you trying to deal with that means you're not dealing with that which caused it. You're not dealing with the problem, you're trying to address the symptoms. The problem is you not being able to overcome the need for expression of your action manifested on mental level, with your speech, with your body. Like no amount of sensual thoughts can result in you physically performing sensuality. Only you can result in you physically performing sensuality on account of being pressured by the sensual thoughts. But again, no amount of pressure can automatically make you do it. Pressure can make you decide to do it and give in to that magical belief that this is how sensuality can be expressed or satisfied. And that's why you can never satisfy, because it's separate domains. Thought and desire is on one domain. Your physical satisfaction, scratching the itch, is completely separate domain. And you're the one. That's why sensuality is upadana. It's an assumption. Taking it to be that which it isn't. You take physical domain to be that expression of the mental domain. But they're two separate domains, as I said, unaware of each other. Nothing to do with each other. It's thought and physical action. You are the one who makes them connect, so to speak. They can't really connect. That's why freedom from sensuality is possible in the first place. If they were truly connectable, means yeah, you could truly satisfy your desires that manifest on the level of your thinking.
Things could be released.
But it requires belief. Upadana is a form of belief. That's why belief in virtue and duty, self-view, like a belief, believing that there is an independent self, belief of sensuality. You believe that that's what sensuality is in that physical domain. But it's your thought and desire, that's what sensuality is. So if you start restraining, which means you prevent the habit of that expression of it along the physical lines, in the physical domain, you will stop feeding that wrong belief. And then it will become apparent. There is a thought of sensuality, and in itself, that's already enclosed, that's already finished. It's a phenomenon of desire. But that, meaning I now go and do this and pursue this food or this person, or whatever I want, it's a completely separate thing that only your magical belief united as one leading to the other. And that's why it's irreversible as well. Once that becomes apparent, you cannot then reintroduce that magical belief. Only ignoring it enables you to maintain the connection between the two, because there isn't a connection. So ignoring that there is no connection, that's how you maintain the connection.